Well, time for Story Corner and another interesting wee tale I heard recently. Now, well, I say wee, it's actually a bit of a long one, so maybe grab yourself a dram or something warm and settle in for it. Now, there was once a poor Highland family, down on their luck. The husband had been an excellent tailor, but times had been hard for everybody. Nobody really needed fine new clothes anymore. And the few jobs he was getting, they just weren't enough. The family, they were forced to resort to begging. The tailor was a proud man though, he wanted to work for a living. His wife and son, they managed to scrape enough together for the two of them. You know, she would sing on the street and the boy would play his tin whistle. But the tailor knew, if anything, he was a fully grown man, his large appetite was just a burden on the other two. So, he agreed with his wife. He was going to set off until he found a job, managed to earn enough to get them back on their feet. And so he began to walk. Now, he stopped everywhere he passed, but nobody had any work for him. Until days later he came to a farm. The farmer only had a few bits and pieces for a tailor to do, but you could always do an extra set of hands around the farm, so if the man agreed to help with that, he had a deal. And things went well for the tailor at the farm. He worked hard and he was fed well, and the farmer and his wife, excellent company. The tailor, he had to be careful around the farmer's wife though. You could tell there was something canny about her. Get on the wrong side and she could make the milk in your bowl curdle with just a look. He was fairly sure that was just the start of it as well. A year passed. The tailor decided, you know what, I'll stay on. I'll keep on working, keep earning a wee bit more. He needed to make sure he could scrape enough together, as much as possible, before he returned home. Then it was another year and another year. Eventually, 5 years of hard toil. The tailor knew it was finally time to return to his family. He approached the farmer's wife for his wages. She gave him a wee sideways look and said, give you a choice. You can either have your wages, quite a big sum you've built up here, or I can give you 3 important pieces of advice. Well, he had come here for the money, but there was a glint in her eye. Made him sure that advice was going to be far more valuable than anything he could carry home. So, she said, 1. Never take a shortcut. Always go the long way round. 2. Never spend a night in a house with a young red-headed girl and an old man. 3. Before striking out in anger, always count to 10 first. And with that, she handed over a loaf of bread and said, that's not for you, split that evenly between your wife and your son. So, repeating the 3 pieces of advice in his head, the tailor set off on a long road home. And before long he came across a group of traveller folk who, as an aside, travellers always have the best stories. But anyway, they got on well and he took the tailor under their wing. Then he came to a wee dirt track that was heading off the road into the hills. Come with us, they said, as a shortcut to the next town. The tailor remembered his advice though. He said, no, I'm sticking with this path. Well, the traveller said, please yourself, we'll have a drink waiting for you when you finally get to town. And as the man skirted the hills along the main path, he could have sworn he heard a scream and a clash of metal drifting on the wind. By the time he got to town, one of the travellers was sitting there by the side of the road, alone, covered in blood. A gang of thieves had been waiting in an ambush on the shortcut through the hills. He was the only survivor. Barely managed to escape with his life. The tailor was shocked. He helped his traveller friend along to find some shelter for the night. Most people closed their doors as soon as they saw the state of the pair. There was apart from one young lady with bright red hair and a welcoming smile on her face. She beckoned them inside to spend the night with her and her elderly father. The tailor remembered that second piece of advice. He would rather sleep with the pigs, but the traveller wasn't having any of it. He had had enough that day already. Deaf to the tailor's pleading, he limped inside to the warmth. Out in the straw bed he had made for himself, the tailor heard some footsteps in the darkness. An unmistakable voice of that red-haired woman. She was making a diabolical plan with a handsome young gent. They were going to murder her father, blame it on the traveller, so the couple could be together and they would inherit the house. As soon as they left to carry out their scheme, the tailor ran to the town guard and he led them to the house. It was too late for the old man, he was gone. But the guards caught the couple red-handed, and the traveller was saved from a very unjust trial. I mean, after everything that had happened, the tailor pretty much ran the rest of the way home. He arrived in the middle of the night, and he couldn't contain himself. He snuck through the front door and he crept quietly up the stairs, looking forward to the look on his wife's face when he surprised her. He opened the bedroom door, and there was his wife, as beautiful as the day he had left. But next to her, lying face down, was the broad, muscular back of another man. The tailor was in a rage now. After everything he'd gone through for her, she'd welcome somebody else into their bed. He was ready to beat the sleeping man senseless, but remembered he had to count to 10 first. By the time he got to about 7 or 8, his wife opened her eyes, and surprise turned to delight as she shook the figure next to her. "Wake up, son! Your father's finally come home!" He'd been gone so long he barely recognised the man his wee boy had grown into. The pair, they'd been forced to rent out the boy's room for a bit of extra money, and they were sharing the one bed together. Well, the tailor told him his story, and with a sad look, he explained that he had exchanged his wages for 3 pieces of advice. But that advice had saved his life. One thing he still did have was that loaf of bread, the gift to his family from the farmer's wife. He split it in half as he'd been instructed, and with a heavy thud, something fell out of the loaf. Well, what do you know? It was 5 whole years worth of wages from the farm. Sláinte.